Good morning to all of you. We get to Plato Republic, as I said last time. So I refer you to the introduction I gave to all of Plato's thinkings, to the Socratic and Platonic dialogues and the distinction and so on, until we reach the Platonic view of the world, the Platonic system of the world of ideas as reality, the world of copies as our own, and then of course the world of simulacra, copies of illusion, which we ended with and said next time we will do the Republic. So in the Republic, we'll be picking and choosing a bit. We won't do everything. We'll probably stop at what is relevant for us for the question of ontology. It means things that truly exist, and then how this affects the view of art, since we are in aesthetics, and the view of the beautiful more particularly, and its connection, a certain connection to ethics here. We will see how Plato deals with this problem. I must first tell you what the Republic is about. The Republic's title in Greek is Politeia. And Politeia doesn't mean exactly the Republic as we understand it. That's why I think it is an unfortunate translation in many ways. Politeia is linked to polis. Polis is the city, and then this is a book about the affairs of the city or how a city should be built. I remind you that this is normal for Plato because he's living in the time of city-states, right? The Greek city-states. Much like Lebanon, in fact, what we call today Lebanon, much like we can say Phoenicia, had city-states, right? The city-states of Tyre, of Sidon, Tripolis, Byblos, and so on. So, this is about the city and how a city is to be governed in general, the title. Now, but it's more specific than that. The discussion starts in the first book and becomes fixed in the second book. You will see we have 10 books, and we are only dealing with the 10th book. But the context is this. The question comes about justice. Okay? What is justice for Plato? So we have the usual dialogue, we have the link to piety that is challenged, and so on and so forth. What we need to retain is that for Plato, we end up saying that we have to look at the city as we look at the human. In other words, we can consider the city as a bigger human, as a bigger manifestation of the human. So the human is composed, as you know, of a body and most importantly of a soul. The soul for Plato has 3 parts. This you must retain. The first part is the vegetative part. That is the lower part. The Greek text gives us epithumetikon. Epithumetikon. It's the eros, if you like, or the appetitive part, the desire, if you like, the appetitive part. The second part is called the thumos, thumoides, or thumotikon. It has to do with spiritedness. It's the masculine part. Okay. And then we have the higher part, which is the logistikon, the logical, the mind, or nous, or reason. Okay. Now we can reduce these to something more simple and say we have 3 parts that are at the bottom: the vegetative part that seeks things to eat, to drink, and sexuality, and so on. We have the second part that is the emotional, spirited part, and this is the masculine part. And we have the third one, which is the logos or the nous, reason. So we have the vegetative, the spirited, where we have energy, if you like, in today's terms, to do things in one way or another, and the reason. Okay? So, in other words, Plato is going to organize his republic as these parts are organized. How? He says the best thing to organize these parts is for the nous, the logical, the rational part, to govern. Okay, so the rational part, our reason, is the one that contemplates the ideas, right? We contemplate the ideas and thus the truth. We saw that also last time. So reason should then govern the spirit and the vegetative part that we have, our desire for physical things. Okay, so logos should be the head, if you like. Now, each one of these parts is then, if the nous, the reason, is the head, in its right place, doing its right job. So in that case, each one of the parts has a virtue, becomes virtuous. So what are these virtues? So again, when the vegetative part, or the part that has to do with physical desire, is governed by reason, and so is the spirited part governed by reason, we obtain the following virtues. The virtue of the vegetative part is temperance. You can learn it. Temperance. It means you don't eat too much, you don't drink too much, you don't have sex too much, etc. You are temperate. Your desire for physical things is temperate. Okay? So the vegetative part then is the virtue for it is temperance, when it's well governed. The virtue of the spirited part, where you have all this force, all this strength to direct. If it's directed in the right way, then we have courage. Okay, we have courage. So that's the second virtue. Now we have temperance, courage, and the third virtue, the virtue of the rational part, the nous, is wisdom. Okay, so when we have temperance, courage, and wisdom, like this, then we have justice, which is the fourth and most important virtue in this case, when we're talking about the city especially. Justice. So justice means here that each thing is doing what it's supposed to do and is governed by reason. So this is transposed, Plato says, for us, if we to the city. If we want a just city, well governed, then we would have reason on top, which means the philosophers. So the philosophers have to be on top. In the spirited part, we have to have the soldiers that are doing their job with courage, that are defending the city, right? And this is then the second part, the second virtue. And the third virtue, we have the peasants who are working the land, providing the food, doing it right, and they are then in temperance. So we have to transpose this to the city. When in the city the philosopher kings are ruling, when the philosophers are ruling, are directing, when the people with courage are defending, and people with temperance are providing for the physical well-being of everyone, then we have justice. We have a just city. So in this just city, there are things that are allowed in order to maintain this, and things that disturb this ethical way of being. Don't forget that ethos has the meaning of habit and has the meaning of inhabit, to live. The right way then to live would be the ethical way. So if we want the right way to live in this republic of justice, where we have wisdom, courage, and temperance, we have to follow certain things. We don't have to say all of them here, of course, because we are concerned with the question of art in Book 10. But we can guess right before we get into the middle of things, before we are in media res, we can guess, of course, that someone who is a glutton, who eats too much, drinks too much, has excessive sexuality, is not accepted in this republic. Someone who's reckless It means he lacks courage, someone who just wants to fight all the time, go to battle all the time without thinking, is someone that has no place in this republic. And of course, someone who doesn't have wisdom, who doesn't obey at least, who doesn't go under those who have wisdom, will of course also be kicked out, if you like, of the republic, or at least the republic would be made in such a way as he wouldn't be in it. And so we go to the arts. Of course, arts means we have poetry, we have painting, we have music, all of these things. Okay. So we start, book 10. We can follow with me. The easiest way is the pages from the book on top, right? So you have page 308, and before it 307 is the beginning of book 10. Of the many excellences I read, which I perceive in the order of our state, there is none which, upon reflection, pleases me better than the rule about poetry. Socrates here is, of course, a fictional character, and it's Plato's voice. So it's a conversation between Socrates and Glaucon. Glaucon, I believe, is actually the brother of Plato and older than him. Doesn't matter here. So what about this rule of poetry? What is Plato's position? To what do you refer? Question. To the rejection of imitative poetry, which certainly ought not to be received, as I see far more clearly now that the parts of the soul have been distinguished. I gave you the parts of the soul. Question, what do you mean? Speaking in confidence, for I should not like to have my words repeated to the tragedians and the rest of the imitative tribe. But I do not mind saying to you that all poetical imitations are ruinous to the understanding of the hearers, and that the knowledge of their true nature is the only antidote to them. So we have, here's a first position on art, and it's the art of poetry this time. It's refused. But which kind of art? Let's be very specific. Imitative poetry. The word in Greek is mimesis. So it's poetry that tries to imitate things as they are in life. So it means, of course, it's not real life. It's not the life that is participating directly to the ideas, if you like. It's a copy of that life. We are, in a way, in copies of copies, as you know now. So let's continue. Explain the purport of your remark. Well, I will tell you, although I've always from my earliest youth had an awe and love of Homer, which even now makes the words falter on my lips. This is Plato's voice, in fact. For he is the great captain and teacher of the whole of that charming tragic company. But a man is not to be reverenced more than the truth, and therefore I will speak you. What is he saying here? He's saying, just because we have something as foundational to our tradition, it doesn't mean it's true. I may think that Homer is of course the most important poet in Greece. He's the one who wrote the Iliad. He's the one who wrote the Odyssey. If you had any sense of literature, you would know Homer like the English know Shakespeare. It's the same. It's even more in Greece than Shakespeare. Homer is. So even though he's revered, these authorities, these great traditional authorities, would be rejected in favor of what? Of the truth. Of the truth. And the truth, we all know where it comes from. Contemplation of the ideas. The truth comes from philosophers. So not in imitative art. I continue. Very good, he said. Listen to me then, or rather answer me. Put your question. Can you tell me what imitation is? What is mimesis? Okay? For I really do not know. A likely thing, then, that I should know. Why not? For the fuller eye may often see a thing sooner than the keener eye. Okay. Very true, he said, but in your presence, even if I had Any faint notion I could not muster courage to utter it, will you inquire yourself? Well then, shall we begin the inquiry in our usual manner? Whenever a number of individuals have a common name, we assume them to have also a corresponding idea or form. Do you understand me? I do. Let us take any common instance. There are beds and tables in the world, plenty of them, are there not? Yes. But there are only two ideas or forms of them. One, the idea of a bed, the other of a table. True. And the maker of either of them makes a bed or he makes a table for our use in accordance with the idea. That is our way of speaking in this and similar instances. But no artificer makes the ideas themselves. How could he? Impossible. And there is another artist. I should like to know what you should say of him. Who is he? One who is the maker of all the works of all the workmen. What an extraordinary man. Wait a little, and there will be more reason for your saying so. For this is he who is able to make not only vessels of every kind, but plants and animals, himself and all other things, the earth and heaven, and the things which are in heaven or under the earth. He makes the gods also. He must be a wizard and no mistake. Oh, you are incredulous, are you? Do you mean that there is no such maker or creator, or that in one sense there might be a maker of all these things, but in another sense not? Do you see that there is a way in which you could make them all yourself? What way? An easy way enough, or rather there are many ways in which the feat might be quickly and easily accomplished. None quicker than that of turning a mirror round and round. You would soon enough make the sun and the heavens and the earth and yourself and other animals and plants and all the other things of which we were just now speaking in the mirror. Yes, he said, but they would be appearances only. Very good, I said, you are coming to the point now. And the painter too is, as I conceive, just such another. A creator of appearances. So what are we getting here? Plato is basically saying, as we said last week, there is the idea. The ideas are always one. So there is one idea of chair, one idea of car, etc., etc. Now, these ideas are in the world of ideas and they are the reality. We make copies of these. So the ideas are in unity, the copies are in multiplicity, the opposite of unity. They are copies of the original ideas. So we have an artist. This artist makes these. We have to keep in mind that the notion of artist and artisan was not quite present yet. So what we call an artisan, a person today would be someone who makes chairs, who makes books, who makes, any kind of object, is an artisan. So this person is going to make, let's suppose, a chair or a table or a bed. He has the idea of the bed, which is one for everyone. He participates to it, but he looks at it with his mind. And then he makes this physical chair we have here, which is just an imperfect copy, of course, of the original chair. But then Plato is saying there's a third kind of man, or there's a second kind of man, if you like, a second kind of artist. We have three kinds of men here. One who contemplates, the philosopher. One who makes things that are direct copies of the ideas. It's the artisan. And the second type, the third type, which is the man who makes a copy of that copy. Right. So we have a second type of artist, if you like. This one is the one that functions like a mirror. In other words, he is in imitation. He imitates. Right? So imitation, mimesis, is this. We take a copy that was made, like a chair here in my office, and I get a canvas, and on it I paint this chair. So it's just an appearance of a chair. We can call it, if you like, an illusion. From that, go back to me then at the conclusion of Plato's on page 309. Almost at the end, please count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12 lines, and from there, 3 beds and 3 makers of beds, right? Well, then he says, here are three beds. One existing in nature, which is made by God. This is as I think we may say, for no one else can be the maker, right? So this is the idea of chair. Okay? Made from perhaps all eternity by God, anyways. The true existence. I think so. Okay. Second, there is another which is the work of the carpenter, Najjar, right? So the guy, like we said, who makes the chair copying this original nature. Yes? And then the third, the work of the painter. Okay? So, of course, the painter here is the imitator. He's imitating the copy of the chair, and he's twice removed from the original, which is the idea of the chair. All right. The same thing, of course, that the painter does, we can say that the poet does. The poet, the tragic poet, is an imitator, is again thrice removed from the kings, from the philosopher kings, and from the truth, right? He imitates life. He shows us, if you like, on stage, an imitation of true life, but he doesn't give us true life. So, painter and poet are then imitators. They may be very clever at what they do. They may be very good poets, like Homer. They may be very good painters. There may be sculptors, even though he doesn't talk about them, like Phidias, a very good sculptor. But whatever they do, all these artists are thrice removed, if you like, from the original. So, if we remember with this, that the original, the idea, is the truth, and that to reach the truth we have to contemplate the ideas, we can say that they are thrice removed from the truth, right? There is a certain distance from the philosopher as he contemplates the idea to the idea. This is one. There is a second one, it's the copier, the artisan who makes something from the idea, second distance. And then the third, farthest from the idea, is the imitator, the artist. All right. In other words, then, the artists give us not the truth, but what is furthest from the truth. What we may call, in the end, illusion. We may now make a big jump. I'll let you go through, of course, the reading, see how our calculating rational principle should always govern, and so on and so forth. And when it doesn't, of course, then we are far from the truth. Too many things brought about for distinction from between truth and non-truth, and illusion, in, if you like, in art. Now, another thing that leads Plato to reject poetry, a certain type of poetry at least, can be met with on page, let's say, let's go to 321. At the end of the page, I'll read with you. At the end of page 321. Last 3 lines. And the same may be said of lust and anger. Okay. Lust and anger, desire for things to consume, lust and anger. Usually lust can be also very sexual. Now, these are what we call passions. Here we have Plato's view of passions, in the most simple sense of passions. Things that stir us, things that have to do with desire. And of course, not desire to go to contemplate the ideas, but an eros directed to physical things, to our relations with others that are physically present with us. What does he say about them? He said, the same may be said of passions like lust and anger and all the other affections, of desire and pain and pleasure, which are held to be inseparable from every action. In all of them, poetry feeds and waters the passions instead of drying them up. So what does poetry do? This is the problem of poetry, which can be also sometimes a problem of course, painting and music. So we are dealing, in fact, with all the arts. So poetry doesn't allow us to dry the passions. It doesn't allow us, in other words, to not be affected by the passions and to consecrate, to, if you like, to use, to dedicate our soul to the contemplation of ideas instead of being under the passions. So poetry feeds and waters the passions instead of drying them up, hence its danger. She lets them rule, whereas in fact they should never rule, it's reason that should rule, not the passions. She lets them rule, although they ought to be controlled. A very important notion in Plato of control. Reason should be in control. And when reason is in control, then of course we have the temperance and we have the virtue of courage. Okay, so she lets them rule, and in that case we no longer have temperance, although they ought to be controlled if mankind are ever to increase in happiness and virtue. I cannot deny it, answers Glaucon. And Socrates again, therefore, Glaucon, I said, whenever you meet with any of the eulogists of Homer, those who say he's great, who praise him, declaring that he has been the educator of Hellas, the Greeks, and that he is profitable for education and for the ordering of human things, and that you should take him again and again and get to know him and regulate your whole life according to him, to Homer, we may love and honor those who say these things. Okay, we'll tell them, oh, yeah, of course, you respect Homer, this is great. They are excellent people as far as their lights extend. Okay? As far as their intelligence, what they've studied goes, they are good. And we are ready, I continue, to acknowledge that Homer is the greatest of poets and first of tragedy writers. But we must remain firm in our conviction that hymns to the gods and praises of famous men are the only poetry which ought to be admitted into our state. Okay? So, there is a rejection of poetry, but not entirely, we see here. Okay, we can recognize that Homer is a great poet. Who would deny that? But we will not allow anything that is bad about the gods, anything that is not virtuous, to be present in our republic. So, we want a certain, what we call today, censorship in Plato's Republic. We may not allow all poetry to be published. So I would have to take Homer and purify it of all the instances where the gods are presented badly. I reread, we must remain firm in our conviction that hymns, songs to the gods, and praises of famous men, so heroes should be virtuous also, are the only poetry which ought to be admitted into our state. Okay. For if you go beyond this and allow the honeyed muse to enter either in epic or lyric verse, not law and the reason of mankind, which by common consent have ever been deemed best, but pleasure and pain will be the rulers in our state. So we will have the vegetative part, if you like, our eros directed to our physical pleasures governing instead of reason. That is most true, he said. And I continue now, since we have reverted to the subject of poetry, let this our defense serve to show the reasonableness of our former judgment in sending away out of our state an art having the tendencies which we have described for reason constrained us. But that she may not impute to us any harshness or want of politeness, let us tell her, poetry, that there is an ancient quarrel between philosophy and poetry, of which there are many proofs, such as the saying of the yelping hound howling at her lord, or of one might in the vain talk of fools, and the mob of sages circumventing Jews, and the subtle thinkers who are beggars after all. There are innumerable other signs of ancient enmity between them. In spite of this, notwithstanding this, let us assure our sweet friend and the sister arts of imitation that if she will only prove her title to exist in a well-ordered state, we shall be delighted to receive her. We are very conscious of her charms, but we may not on that account betray the truth. Turn the page from me to 323. I dare say, Glaucon, that you are as much charmed by her as I am, especially when she appears in Homer. Yes, indeed, I am greatly charmed. Shall I propose then that she be allowed to return from exile, but upon this condition only that she make a defense of herself in lyrical or some other meter. Certainly, and we may further grant to those of her defenders who are lovers of poetry and yet not poets the permission to speak in prose on her behalf. Let them show not only that she is pleasant but also useful to the states and to human life, and we will listen in a kindly spirit. Jump with me to the end of the next paragraph. Poetry is attractive but not true, you have on the right. So end of that paragraph before the last, that poetry, being such as we have described, is not to be regarded seriously as attaining to the truth, and he who listens to her, fearing for the safety of the city which is within him, should be on his guard against her seductions and make our words his law. So finally, we can keep poetry, and we can keep, in fact, different arts, if these arts don't go in the representation of humans and human life and the gods against virtue, against then what reason says is the good. Reason can reach as the good, as the virtuous, as the one. What is not opposed to this can be kept. This is true in poetry. This is also true, as I said, in painting and in music. In music, for example, Plato is going to prefer the Doric style, which is employed often in the military, as opposed to the Ionic style, which is more flowery. We would have a poetry that is more serious. We would have music that is more serious and that doesn't seek to awaken the passions of lust, anger, whatever it might be, pleasures and so on. It would be rather music that orders, that follows measure, and measure, of course, comes from reason. So poetry and music with good measure is, of course, then under the rational principle and can be kept. So we understand now how we have to mitigate when we say, as is often said, that Plato rejects art from his Republic. He doesn't quite reject art, but he will only accept art if it doesn't go so far as to undermine the work of reason, as to undermine then the ordered, well-measured Republic, and so if it doesn't undermine justice. There we go. We may stop here. This is all we need, I think, from the Republic. So I'm sure you're happy for that. Let us then remember there is a city within us in the sense that our different parts of our soul. So the eros, the thumos, and the logos. Eros, thumos, logos. These three parts, when they are well ordered, we have justice. We have a city within us that is just. And on a larger scale, of course, then when those who work the land are under the principle of temperance, those who defend the state are under the principle of courage, and those who use their reason correctly are then under the virtue of wisdom. We have a well-ordered state, a just state. In that state, the only arts that can be kept are the arts that foster, that encourage, that keep this order and then keep this justice. And so any arts that are imitative and in their imitation stir in us also the passions instead of leading us to contemplate justice and to contemplate the ideas in the end for the thinkers that lead us to keep good measure in the state, and so to have courage and temperance under the wisdom of the rulers. Any art that is not like this will be rejected, and so a good study of which ones are to be kept, the well-measured arts, is to be done, and then they can be considered as part of the Republic. So a certain censorship is in order in Plato's Republic, as you see, and with that we stop today. So the beautiful then is, let's not forget, the beautiful is an idea. This idea then is in the world of ideas. Who reaches the world of ideas? Of course, those who contemplate the world of ideas, those are the philosophers. So if we want beauty for our republic, we again have to be under the rational principle. Beauty is not an illusion. So I say this because our next text is by Plotinus. We will do that next time. And Plotinus, who is a disciple indirectly later on of Plato, and who founds what's called New Platonism, Neoplatonism, is going to be very close always to Plato, but there's going to be a distinction that I'll bring about in the introduction, and then we will see how he looks at beauty differently from Plato. He's not going to say that we are going to reject everything in this physical world as an illusion when it is copying. No, beauty can be present in this world. So we will see that next time. We will see that next time. Meanwhile, I'm going to ask you later on, so let's wait till next time, to compare, so already think of it, Plato and Plotinus, and that will be your third and last, that will be your last assignment. So keep that in mind, that we will be comparing Plato and Plotinus. Until then, next Thursday, I wish you a good week, good luck, stay safe, and bon courage.